the project I'm talking about is primarily a collaboration between the National Park Service and UC Riverside, and so that's all that slide has to say right there. I like to start my slides by talking about a sense of place and where we are in the world and where we're working. And so the sense of place that I'm going to talk about now is that interface between the Mojave Desert and the Colorado Desert. And it's very close to an interface with the montane and coastal area. And I think this is really important. And you should be able to drive out about 10 miles here and look at the overlook just beyond Big Bear and look right down on that line and see that line in the ground. And I encourage you to do that because it's quite an amazing sight. The other sense of place I'm going to give you is a slide very similar to Tom's. And I'm a little concerned here because I wanted to talk about biodiversity. And Peter Kariva said, no, you can't talk about biodiversity. And then Tom used the same slide, but he called about endemism. And I thought, well, that's kind of almost the same thing. And so I'm going to talk about unique species that occur no place else except for where they are. And maybe that's more descriptive, I don't know. I always show this to my classes because it's a great example of what Tom was talking about, is California is amazing when it comes to unique species that occur no place else except for here. And it's also an interesting example about where they don't occur. And I always challenge my students. I say, so why not here? And they say, well, it's flat. Well, no, actually the Rocky Mountains go right through there, so why not there? And then I remind them about a few thousand years ago in this ice sheet that just covered that entire area. And California, for the most part, was ice-free, as was Texas and the southern Appalachians and Florida. And so you can see the patterns of biodiversity as a shadow or a ghost of glaciation past. And it's pretty interesting to look at it from that standpoint. The other point of where we are is we are at one of those giant pimples right there, those high points of places where species occur that that don't occur anyplace else. And we're at one edge of that. Where I'm working is at another edge of that. And so we are at, and I'm going to say it, a biodiversity hotspot. And you need to appreciate that. It's a unique area on the landscape. The other thing I'm going to talk about, of course, is climate change. But I'm going to talk about it from a perspective that maybe a lot of people don't talk about it so much, because usually you get a map that shows how hot it's getting right now. And it is. There's no question about that. And what I want to talk about for at least a second here is how hot it's got in the past and how cold it's got in the past. And so this is almost 1 million years of history. The data comes from the Greenland ice sheet, where they take little bubbles of air from various levels of the ice, and they can determine what the past global temperatures were based on that. And over that almost 1 million years, there's about 10 ice ages. Every time we have a low peak or a low valley there, it's an ice age. Every time we have a high peak, we have a hot period. And those 3 hot ones over there, the highest peaks, are hotter than it is now, considerably hotter than it is now. So the message here is that every single species that we see today, when you look out the window, when you're driving home, has experienced all of those changes in temperature. That means that there's a mechanism inherent in those species that allows them to survive. And that mechanism, whatever it is something that we need to learn about so we can help species, biodiversity, I'll say it again, to survive this current climate change. And I want to make it very clear that each one of these climate changes was due to an orbital anomaly that happens every 40,000 years. The current climate change is not because of that. We've got another 10 or 20,000 years to go before we get to that one. The one climate change that we're dealing with right now is, by consensus of 96% of the scientists, because of us. But the point is that climate change has happened a lot in the past. Every species that you know has survived it. Now, we've lost mammoths, we've lost woolly rhinoceroses, we've lost most of the camels, we've lost horses, we've lost all of these things that did go extinct, particularly right here. That's when most of them went extinct. But everything we see today survived. And so that's an important framework of what we need to think about when we think about climate change now. And so when we think about climate change, we often think about a place where a species is, let's say it's there, and a place where they need to be, which is right here. Sophia was just referring to this organization that has basically created their reason for existence is creating corridors so species can move from one place to the other. And so what happens is a miracle happens and they get from one place to the other. And that miracle isn't much of a miracle if you're a big mammal like a mountain lion or a bighorn sheep or a deer. And it's certainly not a miracle if you're a bird because you can fly, or a butterfly or something like that. What if you're a plant? Or what if you're a lizard or a tortoise or a snake? They can't do that. They can't do that at all. They can't do it fast enough to make a difference, because each and every one of those climate changes I told you about, the ones that they've studied have happened fast. The one we're in right now has happened fast. And so this is part of this mechanism. How are we going to understand climate change from that historical perspective and then be able to use that perspective to think forward? So instead of thinking that a miracle happens, which I love miracles, but I don't believe in them all that much, and understanding that species don't know where they're supposed to go. They don't know that they're supposed to go north. They don't know that they're supposed to go up a hill. Most of the lizards I know don't think about it that deeply. They just know that they can't survive where they are now, and the plants think even less about it. So how does this survival happen? Because we know it's happened in the past. And it's happened multiple times with the same species. So there's a conundrum that you probably haven't thought about before. So I think about that and I think, well, maybe it didn't happen this way at all. Maybe it happened something like this, where we had a place where the species occurred, and as it got hotter, they shifted into one portion of where they occurred. And then it overlapped and we're able to go into another place. So a miracle didn't have to happen. They just moved into a part of their existing range that they already occupied. And as climate may have stabilized, they expanded from that place. And so that's the model that I think probably is how the world worked in terms of the biodiversity that we see today, the animals and plants that are unique to a specific area. An example of that, this is Joshua trees, which is going to play a role in a lot of my talk here. The current range of Joshua trees are these polygons right here. But if we go back to that last glacial maximum, those little triangles represent pack rat middens where Joshua trees were found. So they shifted all the way down into Arizona, past Yuma, down to Oregon Pipe, down to all of those places where Joshua trees don't occur today. But all of these are where they do occur today. So they stayed where they are today. They just expanded from those areas as the world got a lot colder. And so all of those triangles represent places up in here. And if they had perfect information in terms of the pack rat middens, they'd probably have found them throughout this range. So that's an important piece of knowledge to know. So LGM is last glacial maximum current. I think that's straightforward. So there was a study done 2011. And I don't want to besmirch the study. It's not my study, USGS study. They got a lot of press of this. Basically what they said was that they created a model, and the red areas are where Joshua trees occur today. And because they're red, it means they will definitely go extinct. Because he modeled it and he said that they could not exist there in the future. You can see that California loses 99.9% of their Joshua trees. Arizona loses all of their Joshua trees, because the green areas are places where they don't occur today, but they could occur. That's if a miracle happened. And he postulated that the miracle were giant ground sloths that went around eating Joshua trees and then pooped them someplace else. And so again he's postulating is we need to become the new ground sloths. We need to start not chewing them up and pooping someplace else, but at least picking them up and moving to a new place. Assisted migration, which some scientists or some non-scientists especially have embraced and said, yes, this is what we have to do. And a lot of scientists who think about how complex the world is say, that's pretty chancy. I don't know if we want to go that way. There's so many things that are connected to each species. When you start moving just one species, you've really messed something up maybe. But the problem is, here's Joshua Tree National Park right here. Here's where we are right now. The backside of Big Bear is just chock-a-block with Joshua trees right now. All of those go extinct in his model. And I'm going to say something that if I said it in an academic situation, probably 2/3 of the people would stand up and walk out, which is all models are wrong. Every single model that you've ever seen in your life, whether it's a weather model, economic model, or an ecological model, is wrong. The question is, how wrong are they? And are they instructive in and of themselves that it helps us learn about the environment? And with habitat models like this, there's statistical ways to say how accurately they match the data that you use to create them. But it still doesn't tell you whether the model is right or wrong. It just says that you matched the data you used pretty well with the model, but it doesn't tell you whether you matched anyplace else. So in this case, they didn't use any data from over here. They didn't use any data over from here. And so they don't really know whether it matched it well at all. This is where you guys come in, where citizen science comes in, because this is how you validate a model. You don't validate a model testing the data you put into it and taking 5% out and then retesting it again, so oh, it matched it. You validate a model by going out on the ground and saying, they're here. Or if you're concerned about climate change, you validate a model, you go out and say, not only are they here, but they're breeding like crazy. This is a good place. And this is, every one of you can play a role in that, and it's an extremely important role. So we went to the park after that study came out and said, you know, before you change your mind to Creosote Bush National Park, this is Joshua Tree National Park, and those are all points where Joshua trees occur. He said, why don't you let us redo the model? Because the previous model, it wasn't that they did anything wrong per se. What they did is they tried to do too much at once, and scale is everything in ecology. And they tried to look at the entire Mojave Desert and say everything in the Mojave Desert is the same. Every Joshua tree has the same ecological tolerances as every other Joshua tree. And if you're a naturalist at all, you know it's not true. There are some Joshua trees that do really well in some areas and some that don't. And so we said maybe the Joshua trees at the very southern end of the range are doing better than the ones in Utah when it comes to climate change, and maybe we should look at that. So they funded us, we went out and looked at it, created a model that pretty much matched the dots that they had in the model, and our model, of course, went off the park a little bit. There's the model. It matched the dots. Is it a good model? Well, one of the problems was all we did, the data we had were adult trees. And to really understand that, we needed baby trees. We didn't have that. So what we ended up doing is creating a model and say, okay, future climate change, instead of going extinct, those black areas represent areas where Joshua trees have climate refugia, according to the model. That means at the end of this century, so year 2100, there's still be habitat there, and the park was really happy because we said you don't have to change your name, you can keep it at Joshua Tree National Park. And some of those places are where the roads are, so you don't even have to create new roads so the visitors can see the 1 or 2 Joshua tree patches that are still left. But I was concerned about it because I'm not going to see this. I'm not going to see 2100. Some of you are going to see 2100. I'm not going to see 2100. I want to know whether this is right or not. And so I thought about those baby Joshua trees. I said, that's easy data to get, but we don't have it. We don't have any funding to get it. So I went to people like you and I said, I need as much data as I can get on baby Joshua trees. And we had lots of people participate. We had 6-year-olds, we had 30-year-olds, and we had 90-year-old folks going out. And all we said, we need exact points where you got it, measure how high it is. That's all. The only 2 pieces of information we need. It's easy. Give me as much as you want. We got about 700 points in about a month. It was impressive. Went ahead and redid the model, and this green model, and then the yellow on the back is the adult current model. And it said that they are currently breeding within that green area. And that green model matched almost exactly when we tweaked the model just 1 degree. And then we went back to the climate data, and lo and behold, it's already gotten 1 degree warmer. So the breeding data breeding Joshua trees, and the model matched pretty well. And we were able to validate it because we had citizen scientists. Oh, there's the paper. So we want to expand that. Joshua trees are cool, they're iconic, but we're interested in biodiversity. I'm going to use that word a lot because I think you guys get that. I just don't agree with Peter. I think it's a teachable moment. It's not something to ignore. It's a teachable moment. And so we created a series of 27 plots all over the park. And we're going to measure everything that we can. Not everything. We're not going to look at soil biology. Although if we can find somebody who wants to do it on our plots, we'd love that. We're not going to look at insect biodiversity, although if we can find somebody to do it, we'd love that. We're going to look at vertebrates and plants. Those are the two things we're going to look at. And we're going to do it and watch how those species change or don't change over time as it comes to climate change. And then we looked at that and said, okay, that's a great idea. How are we going to do it? And this is long-term research because we need to have an answer or be able to have data that's 30 years from now, or maybe even longer from now, 40 years from now. I won't be there for now then. How are we going to make sure that we have a project that lasts that long? And I can tell you right now, nobody's going to fund us to do a 30-year project. They're just not going to happen. NSF's not going to do it. Park Service isn't going to do it. Nobody's going to do it. And we figured out, citizen scientists. That's how you get long-term projects done. And this is just climate. We're going to go past that. And I love lizards, and so this is post-horn lizard. We're going to talk about that because I'm running out of time. So here's my citizen scientists. That we got a project that we got funded through Earthwatch. And so we have Earthwatch volunteers that come every spring. But we also have local folks, we say, or anybody who wants to join us. And I have created a bit of a monster here in that those local folks call me about every week and say, can we go out again? When are we going to go out again? And so our citizen science is maybe a little different than what you might do or what you've done, because we believe that it's a contract or relationship between the scientists and the citizen scientists, which means I don't just hand you a protocol and say go out and do it and come back and give me the data. It means here's the protocol, let's go do it together. And I'm going to be shoulder to shoulder with you. I'm going to be cheek to jowl, and you're going to see how I think about the environment when I'm out there. You're going to see the questions that I'm asking, and when I start looking for lizards and I say, I wonder why these night lizards are here and not over there. And when I start doing that, the citizen scientists just come and say, well, that's an interesting question. I wonder if it has to do with soil moisture. And they'll come to me and they say, I bet you if we had a soil moisture probe, we could come up with a way of, and I mean, this is just, they're thinking beyond where I'm thinking. I'm thinking, why is it here or there? And they're thinking, well, here's these factors that could be, and we should be measuring those things. And he's right, we should be doing that. And so we're starting to do that now. I also want you to pay attention to this particular woman because I've got the last slide. Her name's Angela Dock. She's from England, and she showed up with her husband to do citizen science with us. And we did this project, and what we found was that using citizen scientists with scientists working with them gave us better data than if we just did it with scientists themselves. We went out there with just scientists and said, go measure lizards on this plot. Then I took the citizen scientists out, and we did it, and we found more species, more individuals, more sensitive species, more rare species than the scientists ever found, just because we had more eyes. It wasn't because the scientists were bad scientists, it was because there were just not enough of them. But when we had a group, 5 or 6 or 10 people that came out with me, we saw so much more, the data was so much better. And so this is basically what this paper says, is that using citizen scientists, at least in the way we were, which again is shoulder to shoulder with the scientists, made a huge, huge difference in the quality of the data and the amount of the data that we were able to collect. Now this is the last slide. And I wanted to bring this up because for us, we want to transform the citizen scientists from a scientist to a citizen scientist. And we want them to transform us. Again, it's that relationship. So Angela, who I showed you the picture, she's from England. And at the end of our week that we had with them, we always sit around in a circle and we say highs and lows. What did you love about this? What did you hate about it? And we went around the circle. There was a lot of us that time. And we got to Angela, and I said, Angela, what did you like? And she said, I'm not ready yet. And so, fine, we went around the circle again. Angela, what did you like? I don't know. So we went around the second time with what you don't like. Angela, are you ready? No, I'm not ready. And the whole time she's writing, the whole time she's just scribbling furiously. And then at the very end, I said, Angela, it's dinner time, we're leaving, you know. And she said, I'm ready now. And so I'm just going to read it to you just because I think it's so wonderful. I'll say she's from England. And before she showed up, she had never been to a desert before in her life, so she got the Oxford Dictionary out and read what it said a desert was. And it said the desert was a dry, sandy, desolate place where nothing lives. That's what the Oxford Dictionary said. So she showed up, and then this is what she wrote. She said, the desert is a fecund place, bursting with life and gentle song, exploding colors and unexpected magic, where perfume wraps around baked earth. It's a hypnotic space where people dream and souls uplift, and tiny creatures drift and shift, and monumental trees exist, where mighty Joshuas and massive oaks stand side by side, and ghost flowers whisper. Lizards dart and ocotillos shout resplendent and persist, where Mojave asters yield their lavender mist, and where zebra tails and elusive lions leave their trails. The desert is not, most definitely not, a desolate place. So that transformed me. I mean, I'm not a poet, but I looked at that and I said, this is amazing. This is just, to have somebody who had never seen a desert before, and so I use this in every one of my talks about this project because I think it is so valuable that not only did we transform her, but she's transforming me. And that's the important part, that is we had that relationship. And I think that's the beauty and the strength of citizen scientists. iNaturalist is a great product, it really is, but there's no connection between the scientists that are using it and the people that are putting the data together. And I think if there was, it would be even more powerful. But in this case, we had the scientists side by side, we ate dinner with them, we did. And the Earthwatch people would say, you know, talking about the scientists, you're their rock stars, you got to act like rock stars. And I said, there are rock stars. You know, the citizen scientists, they're out here volunteering their time, they're paying to be with us when it comes to Earthwatch. They are our rock stars. They're amazing, amazing folks. So thank you very much.
A few minutes for questions for Cam, and then I think we'll have a few minutes for questions for all of them or any of them.
Hi, I went to a talk about climate change in the Sierra Nevada specifically, and they were talking, of course, about how species are adapting and the idea that they go uphill when the climate's changing because they're going up in elevation because it's more like their current conditions. And I listened to a scientist kind of offer some alternate explanations besides moving up in elevation to adapt to climate. And I was kind of thinking about those things that she suggested when you were talking about the Joshua trees. And I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about what exactly the Joshua trees might be doing to adapt to climate change, if you have any ideas.
You want some science. Well, that's good. I know I didn't have a lot of time, so I really wanted to focus on the citizen science part of it, but from a common sense standpoint and from every model that we've ever run, the species either move north, or if you're in the south hemisphere, they move south, and they move up a hill, or they do both. That's what they do. That's what the model assumes they're going to do. There's been some metadata analysis, extensive metadata analysis for plant records, and found that about half of them do that, and of the other half, about a third of them don't move, and the other 2/3 go down the hill. And so I've been looking at some of my own data on this and realized, and there's some other examples, there's some bird data that supports the same thing. There's actually data from the Grinnell resurveys that have come out of the Sierra Nevada that have shown almost the same thing. Most of the species go up, some of them go downhill, some of them don't move at all. And so how come they go downhill? Well, at least with the metadata analysis of the plants and with the work that I'm doing with some lizards, it's because there are things like north-facing slopes, that have cold drainages that allow that habitat to actually shift downhill. And it could mean that the tops of the mountains actually get drier, but whatever moisture it is goes to the bottom of, again, the watershed. That's another bad word we learned not to use, but the place where water accumulates underneath the soil. And so you can explain it, and it makes perfect sense from a natural history standpoint, but the models are completely wrong because they can't see that. It's too detailed for the models to see. And so that's, again, where you need the citizen scientists, because they can, or at least somebody who has a natural history base. And what dismays me so much, and I do a lot of this modeling, believe me, and so I can besmirch it as much as I want because I am a modeler in many respects. But what really frustrates me is most modelers are not natural history historians. And so when they do a model, they think it's real. And I look at the model and go, I know that animal, it doesn't do that, or I know that plant, it doesn't do that, so I know it's junk and I throw it away and try again. Well, if you're not a natural historian, or if you don't have natural historians as part of your team, you'll never know it's a junk model. And so you publish it and everybody thinks it's real, which gets back to, I think, Tom's statement about junk science gets proliferated into junk information. It's exactly what Tom was saying. And those models are a perfect example of that. And it's a perfect example of why natural historians and citizen scientists are critical to right the ship. Does that answer your question a little bit anyway? Good.
I worked for a city that did some restoration projects where they dutifully got all of the plant material sourced from within the watershed, so not from one watershed over. And do you feel like following this protocol too strictly could limit adaptability?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think there's a lot of restoration ecologists that are purists and would say, yes, exactly what you did is right. But there is another group that they do something that's called common garden experiments, which they take the same species and they move it in different places and see where does it function best as climate change advances. And so they might take a chaparral plant and try to plant it a little bit up the slope and see if that makes a difference. And so I think my recommendation would be to focus on local plant material, but grab some that might be from a little hotter place that seems to be doing well and put that into the mix as well and see if that makes a difference. There's somebody in the back there.
Thanks so much for the talk, Cameron. That was really great, and I really appreciate your kind of contrarian, skeptical disposition, but maybe I can even add another layer onto that and say that it seems like there's an inclination these days to attribute a lot of things to climate, right? And for very good reason. But I wonder how the land use history of these places factors in to the distribution of some of these species as well. So it's been a little bit longer time in much of Joshua Tree, but not all of Joshua Tree, and certainly throughout the Mojave Desert, there's a long history of ranching and other forms of land uses. And so is there a way to factor that environmental history into the natural history and the analysis of climate change?
I think there is. So, for instance, Joshua Tree National Park used to be a national monument, and before it was a national monument, it was a ranch. It was a couple of ranches, but it was mainly the Keys Ranch. And they had cows running all the way through it, and they had cowboys. And it's interesting from an anthropological and history standpoint, as we're out there, we'll find the tuna cans that the cowboys left in their camps and so forth and so on. And the interesting things that we can see is that around those cowboy camps, you can see all of the trees are young because they needed firewood and they took everything down and created a bare spot, and now it's all these young, very vigorous plants coming into the same place. And maybe that's telling us something about the site. So I think there is a way to do that. I don't think we should dismiss ranching or any other human use and say, well, that's bad and let's forget it. I think we need to look at that and see what was its immediate impact and what is its long-term impact, and is that positive or negative? Sure.
Any
Okay.
questions for any of our speakers?